It started with a budget proposal, and in the weeks following, the story has spilled over to missing legislators, mass protests, and prank phone calls. But at the heart of the Wisconsin budget debate are the role and the rights of public sector unions. We examine their future in the American workforce today on The Professors.
From across the city and the 7 city colleges of Chicago, broadcasting from 63rd and Halsted at Kennedy King College. Professors take the art of conversation to a higher degree.
I'm Ted Williams from Kennedy King College. Joining me today are Professors Antonio Vasquez from Wilbur Wright College, Rashid Carter from Olive Harvey College, and from Chicago State University, Akbar Dima. Well, welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Well, this is a hot topic. We all have seen sort of what is going on in Wisconsin right now. And I'm very excited to have the conversation not just about the teachers union issues that are going on in Wisconsin and Ohio and in Indiana, but I think overall today about the issue of unions as a whole and their future in the American democracy. So before we begin that conversation, it'd be great for one of you guys to just sort of give our audience a quick background on what's happening right now with the issue in Wisconsin. Sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So, of course, we know that Governor Scott Walker is essentially proposing to destabilize collective bargaining in the state of Wisconsin. And essentially, he wants to prevent public employees from unionizing, from having any collective voice to offset some of the intentions of the maybe administrators or employers in general. And that is a very contentious issue, given the plight of unions over the past few decades. Unions, for the first time ever, public unions have more employees than private unions. And so this is, you could probably refer to it as a last stand of unionized workers in America. And it's a very hot button issue, and it's increasingly important for us. And I know we're not going to stay only on the notion of how teachers are affected here, but when we talk about this whole notion of unions, it's important that we think about how the middle class in this country is supported, how they're thought about, how they're received, and how we look to support them in the communities that they live in. And unfortunately, it seems like there is this sort of distinction being created between those who are working aggressively in the open market and those who are in unions who are free riding off of the energies of the rest of America.
What do you guys think about this Wisconsin standoff right now?
Well, I should add that apart from the fact that he is trying to bust the unions, public sector unions there are other issues that we must bring into sharp focus here. One is that while he is trying to do that, he is trying to encourage big business to come and take over some of the public facilities in Wisconsin such that big business will have more say in the government while he is using his power to essentially muzzle the public sector unions there. I should also point out that he has indicated that if one Democrat out of the 14 that left the state do not come back to join the Republicans, so a vote is taken, he will start to issue pink slip today.
And, you know,
that is very, very dangerous, and I think it will contribute to the weakening of participation in the political process in this country and weakening of the unions and thereby weakening American democracy overall.
And he's also threatened to arrest them, which I think is quite outlandish.
You know, to talk about the influence of unions, because they've always been friends of Democrats, going back to when Roosevelt allowed for collective bargaining. And we think about a very important decision that came out of the Supreme Court on the 21st of January of 2010, which allowed corporations to be able, and non-for-profits and unions and trade associations to be able to get unlimited dollars to campaigns.
Absolutely.
Now, remember, the last presidential campaign was the $1 billion campaign. The next one is going to be a $2 billion campaign. So that if you wanted to weaken your opponent, and you were a Republican, possibly one long-term strategic goal would be to weaken the unions so that they would be unable to give as much in terms of contributions to those favored party. And that puts a different strategic spin on the possibility.
You know, we had a show actually on that issue about corporations and their ability to have the same free speech rights as individuals. And it's interesting because we were talking primarily about corporations, but unions are very, very powerful. And for this full disclaimer, obviously, full disclosure, we all obviously all here are in the teaching profession, are involved in unions, and so I think that we should, make that clear. What I'd like to do is I'd like to throw out the argument on the other side, which essentially says that unions are too big, they're too powerful, they're too influential in the political process, and as a result, many people argue that unions are essentially to blame for some of the challenges that we face in the public school system. Now, I want to throw that out to you guys so we can talk about that, because that is what the other side of this issue is saying. What would you say to that?
I agree. I mean, we're all to blame for the issues that plague us nationwide, especially as it speaks to our economy. But this is a very concerted effort to destabilize unions. So when Antonio talks about the politicization of union busting, as it were, when you look at the caveats in the legislation that the governor is proposing, he's basically saying that, yeah, you can be a part of a union, but you don't have to pay dues. So that's really the focus is to destabilize the unions as a galvanizing force behind the oppositional party. And so from that perspective, again, I think that the argument is even a bit disingenuous. It's not really about the union being a threat, and ultimately, if these resources are reshifted in terms of the private sector, so that the tax cuts that have accompanied these cuts in government spending in Wisconsin, they were sold as a way of creating net jobs and help bolstering the recovery. But ultimately, what we know is that that probably will not happen, because after all of this, all of the fuss is gone, we know that it's probably going to be net job loss, and we're going to see increased destabilization amongst the middle class. That's the bigger issue, I think.
But let's. Okay, so once again, I agree with you guys. I mean, I'm a teacher myself. I helped to negotiate. I was in the team that negotiated the part-timers contract when I was a part-time adjunct faculty member. And so I loved the union, fought very hard for our rights as adjunct professors in the city colleges. But people say, and there's a perception, that unions make it difficult for people to fire teachers, for instance, in public schools. The unions make it difficult for administrators to move around and change things that need to be changed based on the demand of the consumer, which is the student at this point. So how do we, as folks who are involved in unions, who are in this position, how do we convince the rest of the world that all of these things, that the evil unions are not as evil as people believe they are?
Well, if you look at it, anywhere you involve people in a bargaining process, whether it is in the Congress, whether it is in a family situation, or whether it is in the union, you are going to have difficulties reaching acceptable consensus. So we have a situation here where the unions are negotiating for benefits. There are only so many. The pie is just there. You can slice it one way or the other, but the pie is the same. So when you have a situation like this, you have a difficult situation indeed to deal with. Here is what I see as the trajectories in the public sector, private sector unionization in this country. The first union strike that you had in the public sector was the Boston Police in 1919. Even before you had the collective bargaining in the public sector as a right under Kennedy administration. So you have a situation where public sector unions came into negotiations because they were not getting much of what the private sector unions were getting. So on January 16th, 1962, President Kennedy signed an executive order number 10988, unionizing most of the federal employees. It was during that time that unions gained strength in the 1970s and in the 1960s, as it were. So they had essentially caught up on the benefits and on the salaries. And then in the 1980s, with the Reagan firing the air traffic controllers, you had a situation where unions, public sector unions in particular, became a bad thing.
Yeah.
And
So-
that goes down to a question, too, that you had workers with two different rights. You had the private sector that could unionize and the public sector that couldn't. And so the civil rights movement said people should have the same rights regardless of status.
Absolutely.
And so that was the resolution to that. And now we're saying those civil rights can be removed.
Yeah.
And that the contract between teachers and the state can be changed. But at the same time, you remember Christopher Dodd, who was on the banking committee, said, oh, we can't touch the contract of AIG executives because contracts are sacrosanct, except when it comes down to the people that aren't as powerful as Wall Street.
Very, very good point. You know, it's so ironic that, you know, Reagan was a big union buster, but he was the head of a union, the Screen Actors Guild, which I find to be quite ironic. You know, what has happened in the process, in the middle of all of this, has been that I think that teachers have been demonized. And you know, I saw this really funny thing on that John Daly did about, you know, how these fat cat teachers, you know, are basically, you know, it was a joke basically that, you know, these teachers are making so much money. I mean, you know, the average teacher salary in Wisconsin is $51,000, okay, and they get about $25,000 in benefits. So you put that together, it's about $76,000. Well, what people need to understand is that, you know, teachers are not making the kind of money that we could essentially blame them for these budget crises that are happening. And I just think it's laughable to suggest that because they're so entrenched and because their benefits are so good that, you know, that they're all living, you know, high off the hog, and that they're the reason for
And the point with, to go back to that in a way, is that now we're thought of as these fat cats. But remember, the Republicans didn't want to put a tax on people that earn $250,000 because that didn't make you rich. But all of a sudden now being a $50,000 a year teacher makes you rich. And so which is it? How consistent and inconsistent is this
Well,
thinking?
absolutely. In addition to the fact that they're constantly selling this this characterization of teachers as people who work only 9 months, we have all this time off. When in fact, if you know anything about a teacher, you know we put way more than 30 or 40 hours in a week. We work longer than 9-month years. We usually work through breaks to prepare for the next semester or the next term. We put a lot of effort in, and if you break that down on a per-hour basis, a lot of times we make very close to minimum wage if you look at it from that perspective. But getting back to the point before, again, the reason why I say that this whole polemic is a bit disingenuous is because there has been an effort by the part of the union to compromise. And the governor is saying, I will not compromise. I don't want to talk to you. Come back home, Democrats who've abdicated your responsibility, come home and we can talk. But he's made no bones about it with that mysterious blogger who called posing as one of the Koch brothers, one of his primary campaign contributors. He basically made it known, if he comes back, if they come back, we're going to still do what we have to do. So there is no negotiation.
And let's think about this idea of going back to this this Wall Street thing. It was a good example because we didn't want to cap CEO pay because it would lead to a brain drain. But if we cap pay at the universities and community colleges, that could lead to a brain drain also.
Absolutely.
And so with one group, we say, no, let the market go in and do what they bear. And let's not go in and alter it whatsoever, but let's go in and then set caps in the other area. Which is,
I want to return back to this question you posed, which fundamentally is that why is everyone criticizing the teachers' union? Why are they so relentless in their criticism of the teachers' unions? I think one thing you should note is that the teachers are not people who are making big money that they have been talking about. Teachers make nearly next to nothing in some district, not even up to cost of living. In Wisconsin in particular, in the early 1990s, what happened was that Wisconsin negotiated salary increases for teachers at the K-12 as well as the universities. University of Wisconsin is a very good institution. They negotiated for 3 years, some got up to 17% pay raise. But that was to catch up because Wisconsin was paying below national average. Before I came to Chicago State, I was offered a job at the University of Wisconsin River Falls. I had to turn it down because the salary they were offering there was less than what Chicago State was offering me. But they promised that the salaries would go up. Now that the salaries have come up a little bit, they are complaining that the teachers are taking more than they should.